Hi, and welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know, CSYSK.
It's true.
That is correct, yes.
Yeah.
I don't think we've ever introduced it that way. Wow.
I always CSYSK.
CISK. Yeah, we're an acronym, boys.
We are an acronym. We've made it.
Anyway, we are a podcast that is about the classical world, which means old books, art, architecture, and theology and philosophy and stuff. And our goal is to make that stuff palatable to a modern audience and tell you all the things you should have been told in school but weren't. And so I'm here with two of my bros, one Graham Donaldson.
Hi.
And one Thomas Fletcher Magby.
Hello.
And we three all work at a classical school in Austin, Texas, named Veritas Academy. And we like it. And that's our story.
That's right.
Yep. So
come and take it.
What? Well, no, please don't take it.
So today the question is, are you out of work? Are you looking for a new job? Well, then call Templar. We aggressively seek employment in all stretches of the world.
Is this a temp agency?
Yeah, it's a temp agency, Templar.
Templar agency.
And so we do require there's a strict dress code, but you'll be fitted with, you'll be well protected in your job.
Great.
So Templar.
And dudes only, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, just guys.
Yes, today
awesome.
we are, thank you, AJ.
sounds great. Yeah, that's great, yeah.
You know what one of my favorite episodes of all time on classical stuff was?
What?
Was the one you did on Michelangelo, the painting.
Yeah.
I feel like we got to do more painting episodes.
Yeah,
that was a
I'm
really
super
fun
into
one.
it. I'm going to work on it after my 10 episodes of Plato. Just kidding. I'll probably step away. I'm about Platoed out.
So, guys, we are going to be talking about the Knights Templar today, and we're going to get through their founding, their reasons for existing, and then just sort of talk a little bit about the Middle Eastern world, as it was known, the Levant region during the Crusades, and also just talk a little bit about like how Christians should think about, I don't know how we should think about it, but how I think about the Crusades today, or how we sort of deal with this.
It's going to be a big topic.
It's a rough period.
It is, yeah.
Are we going to talk about the Illuminati or not? Is Kanye a Templar?
Kanye's not a Templar. So yes, so the Templars are great in that they were horrendously crushed, and everybody was murdered on the same day by the French state in 13-something.
Yowzers.
But it was on Friday the 13th,
Whoa.
which is where we
get... Is that why we think it's weird?
It is why we get it. There's a couple of things. Well, 13th disciple was Judas, or if the 12 disciples and Jesus, so if you have 13, the last dude was Judas. So there's that's one reason why 13 is unlucky. But the big
couldn't Judas have also been like 7?
He could have been 7. But
why do we think he's 13th? We don't know that for sure.
If you did alphabetical, like... Sorry, Zacchaeus. He wasn't a disciple, but yeah. But anyway, yes, Friday the 13th is the day that all the Templars were rounded up and were put on trial, and all their stuff was taken. And so that's where we get the Friday the 13th superstition from.
Shouldn't this be at the end of the episode?
I know. I'm just telling you this.
Spoiler.
But you said the Illuminati. So the reason why the Templars are now today seen as like this shadowy organization is because they were all. Well, that. No, because they were all rounded up and then pretty much stamped out. And so we just assumed that something as powerful as they were couldn't be stamped out so decisively. They must still be around seeking after revenge.
That's a bad reason.
It is a bad reason.
There's like one guy who didn't get stamped out, and he's...
Well, the head of the Templars also did, his last words were like, God will avenge us for our murder. Or God will, he basically said something like, we're going to get you. And then they light him on fire.
Like that guy in, was it Ghostbuster 2, Viggo Mortensen? Right, death is but a door. I'll look up the quote.
Yeah, exactly the
Sounds
same.
important.
But anyway, so let's talk a little bit about the world of the Levant.
Well, can I? Our source text for today is.
I'm taking this from
right?
Yes, the Da Vinci Code is our source text.
Thank you. Good.
I got a bunch. Used a bunch of different sources. The main one is the wonderful book called The Templars by Dan Jones, the same author who wrote on the Plantagenets and also the War of the Roses, where I've gotten a lot of the sort of just the basic historical story of a lot of the Plantagenet series. They're really good books, but I've also sort of compiled this with other stuff together.
Cool.
In the Middle East or the Levant region during the 11th century, so the year 1000 and whatnot, it was ruled by a kind of like a confederation of Islamic states. And they were sometimes at war with each other, sometimes peaceful. But around the year 1100, the Muslim world was pretty fractured. And it kind of split into two camps. And actually, it's the two camps that we still have today. We've got Sunnis and Shiites. I can never keep them straight. I'm not a scholar of Islamic history. I don't know enough about it. It's an area that I find very interesting, but I don't know enough to speak intelligently about it. But we've got sort of two main dynasties or regions, and they were kind of at war with each other, which meant that they were both pretty weak in the 1100s. So we have the Seljuks or Seljuks. They were in Turkey. They were Turks and Persians mainly, and but they were ultimately loyal to the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. And the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, they were Sunni, I think. I'm pretty sure. So they were the Sunni branch of Islam. And then you have the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt, and they were called the Fatimid Caliphate because they claimed to be descended from Fatima, which was the daughter of Muhammad, and they were Shiites in Egypt. Anyway, so you've got the Fatima Caliphate and you've got the Seljuks, and the Seljuks were the ones who attacked the Eastern Orthodox Church. And sort of the Byzantine kingdom, and took over a bunch of cities in the Middle East that spawned and started the First Crusade. Oh, okay. So they...
Wait, so who attacked who?
The Seljuks attacked the Eastern Orthodox and sort of...
but not the folks in Egypt.
No. But they had been sort of at war. They had been sort of going back and forth and always, having wars in Syria and having wars in what we now call Jordan and having wars in what we now call Israel.
The Seljuks and the what was the other one?
The Fatimid Caliphate.
The Fatimid Caliphate.
Yep.
They've been having wars back and forth, and then eventually the Seljuks attack the Eastern Orthodox Church.
So they would have wars. They would have peace. They would say, all right, we're going to stop for 10 years and then every now and then in these stories of these caliphates, you've got a leader who comes up and he can kind of like bridge the gaps between all these fractured groups, and then he'll die and he'll split the empire into his 4 sons, and then his 4 sons are just terrible and it doesn't really work.
Right.
But anyway, so the Seljuks had attacked. We're in Turkey and we're sort of moving into Greece, and then Constantinople was the head of the Byzantine Church, and so there was some wars there, and so then the First Crusade was called, and the First Crusade was pretty wildly successful. In terms of now, the reason why it was wildly successful was because the whole region was weakened by the attacks by these two caliphates being against each other, the Sunnis and the Shiites. The Seljuks and the Fatimid Caliphate. Again, I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing Seljuk wrong.
Just so to say that it's successful means.
Okay, to say it was successful means that they got Jerusalem.
Yeah, sure.
They got Jerusalem on July 15th, 1099.
Okay.
So on July 15th, 1099, the First Crusade conquered Jerusalem and conquered a bunch of other cities like Jerusalem, Antioch, Tripoli, Acre, Beirut, Sidon, all these sort of famous port cities. In the First Crusade, they were now in Christian hands. Actually, before we kind of go into this, I just want to give one little caveat about talking about this period of history. I never really learned any of the Middle Ages growing up. When I did history in Canadian public school, it was Rome ended, and then it was the dark time, right, and then the Enlightenment came, and now we've got democracy. Right. Like that was kind of how history was presented to me. Sure. So I never really learned anything about the Middle Ages, and I, as a Protestant, I sort of had probably internalized things like
Dark Ages are bad.
Dark Ages, or a period of superstition where Christian faith kind of went underground, and
the Christian faith sort of ruled everything, but not in a healthy way.
Not in a healthy way,
and it was all allied with power, and nobody learned anything, and all the real knowledge was stuck behind Latin.
And the thing that I was always nervous was that if I started studying the Crusades, I was going to find an ugliness that was disturbing. Yep. And in studying it, I found an ugliness that was disturbing, but not the one that I was expecting. What I was expecting when I was starting to look into the Crusades was I knew it was going to be bloody because it was,
Right.
but I had always assumed that it was a really that it was more religiously charged than I think it actually ended up, and than it actually was in history.
Interesting.
Thinking that like maybe it was just the way that it had been built up to me or had been talked about, was that these were battles of competing religious ideologies, and it's a black eye for the church. I think it is a black eye for the church, but in reading it, I realized it was far more about the same things that every other war is about: money and power, and then a battle of sort of religious ideology. There is definitely men on both sides who fought with this sort of religious ideology,
sure.
but
not
the
most.
Crusades are more of a just litany of absolute incompetence on mainly the Christian side. Like the Christian leaders in the Middle East during this time were had a very tenuous grasp on any position of power. The only reason they could remain in power was because the vastly superior Muslim force would fight each other and leave sort of Christendom alone, and Christianity could kind of like carve out a niche. But then any time the Islamic world got its act together and were like, let's get rid of the church or the Christians in the Middle East, like they threw down.
Which is that the story of the Second Crusade?
Yeah, and then it's the story of Saladin, which we'll get to, not today.
Yeah.
But so I guess I was expecting more of this like clash of equals, but in reality, it's kind of the Christians in the middle in the Crusader states were totally outnumbered, incredibly incompetent. A lot of it was pretty corrupt, and they didn't hold on because of their like adherence to their faith, but they held on basically because of
they weren't important enough.
They weren't important
noticed.
enough to be attacked until they got important enough to be attacked, right? So. That wasn't what I was expecting going into it, and then realizing that it was like, oh, not that the Crusades aren't a big deal, but they weren't sort of the big bad black guy that I thought it was. It's more of like just sort of
Well, they're bad because of the deaths, right?
They're bad because of death, and bad because I think taking up the sword in the name of Christ is a pretty troublesome and problematic thing.
Sure.
And there was lots of people who were against the Templars for that very reason.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. They were not completely welcomed by all aspects of Christianity, and there was theologians and scholars and monks and monastics and priests all throughout the sort of 200 years that the Templars existed, saying like, why do we have these guys?
Right.
Why does the church? Why does the God who dies for the sins of the world need dudes with swords? Like there was that dissension. But anyway, I just wanted to sort of put that caveat out there that, and maybe it's just a testament to like not believing or just needing to go study things for yourself. Because the Crusades to me is still troubling and a black eye for the church, but it wasn't nearly as this, big as I guess I thought it was.
Okay. I'll be curious to. I mean, I'm interested in this episode now. Like,
it's more just like a litany of terrible military decisions based on bravado. It's kind of like you gave a state to a bunch of like really spirited people that had no other grounding and like destroyed everything. I don't know. I think if you are looking for better examples of leadership, and was also more interesting stories of the Middle Ages, like the English kings and the French kings are just sort of more interesting. Anyway, whatever. So Jerusalem was taken over in 1099, and it was a very terrible and bloody affair. The Crusaders ransacked the city, as often happens when cities get taken over. There are horrible stories of people who lived in the city swallowing their gold coins because they didn't want the Crusaders to get their gold, and when the Crusaders realized this, were cutting open the bodies and disemboweling people for their gold coins, and just horrible, terrible things.
Yep.
But Jerusalem was taken in 1099, and then we had an increase in pilgrimage because people want to come. And they're like, oh, Jerusalem is now a safer space for Western Christendom. Everyone's going to come. Let's see where Jesus died. Let's see the tomb.
So the first crusade, did we talk about why that was motivated, or was it just it was
motivated because the Seljuks had attacked and taken over some other churches in
That's right.
in the Christian East, and everyone was just sort of like, whoa, this is happening now, and so it kind of was this.
Bit reactionary.
The Christian West had sort of coalesced into a pretty peaceful time. Chartres was 200 years after Charlemagne or so. So you had this Christian West that didn't have these big wars against each other. So I guess they were looking for something to do, and then you had very pious.
You gotta fight somebody.
You had a very pious, and you had a very motivated Pope Urban the third, who called the First Crusade. Anyway, Pope Urban.
Was he the one? He did have a really good fashion sense.
It's Keith Urban.
Shopped at Urban
Outfitters. Yeah, he outfitted.
That's
his
actually
guys.
where it started. Was he had a little outfitting outpost?
Yeah, exactly.
Outfitting his army.
Pope Urban Outfitters. Oh my word. So anybody wanted to go. So a bunch of people wanted to go on the crusade or on pilgrimage, and so after the First Crusade, just for some terms, 4 new states were created. You had the Kingdom of Jerusalem. You had the county of Edessa. You had the county of Tripoli, and then you had the Principality of Antioch. So you basically have these 4 states, and they are what are known as the Crusader states. Big cities in these states are Jerusalem, Acre, Beirut, Tripoli, Sidon. These are some of the big cities that were a lot of the castles. These were a lot of these wars happen. And so a bunch of pilgrims are going to the Levant. They're going to Jerusalem. They want to see all the sights, but it's still really dangerous on the roads. It's really dangerous to get there, and just because these cities were taken, they are surrounded by caliphates, surrounded by the Muslim world, and so there was pilgrims would be accosted and robbed and slaughtered and all sorts of things. Anyway, there was 2 big, terrible things that happened on Easter, and there was a big slaughter of about 700 pilgrims after the miracle of the oil lamp. Are you aware of the oil lamp in Christ's tomb?
No.
So this is apparently a miraculous thing that every Easter. The moment that Christ is on Easter Saturday, when Christ was supposed to have risen, or when Christ did rise, what is supposed to happen is that there is this oil lamp that sits next to the tomb that is off, or that isn't burning, and then it lights itself on the hour that Christ was raised from the dead as a remembrance, the little pious oil lamp.
Wow.
Apparently this still happens today. I don't know.
For reals?
Yeah, for realsies.
That's awesome.
Wow.
I wonder, so I know God has a sense of humor, or else we wouldn't have senses of humor. And sometimes I wonder if any of these are just God trolling us and thinking it's hilarious.
Just having a little fun.
Like,
little
boop,
lamp.
oil lamp, that's hilarious.
Yeah, and maybe. Okay.
Because I don't know, does it make us feel more pious? It just seems kind of fun.
The little miracle, the little oil lamps,
just a little miracle,
just a reminder that Christ was risen here.
Yeah,
maybe.
That's
I don't know.
Kind of fun. I don't know.
I also do think it's a kind of an adorable miracle.
Right.
That's
what I'm
lamp.
saying.
Yeah,
it's not.
a good one.
It's not like. It's not helping large groups of people.
No,
it might
it's
help
just-
us be
it's
have
just
a little
another
more
little
faith. It's
thing.
just kind of like kind of cute.
But anyway, so when this happened, the pilgrims that were there sort of left the scene in sort of exaltation. They had spent all this time fasting for Easter, and as they were on the road, 700 of them were rounded up by brigands on horseback and were slaughtered by a dude named Il-Ghazi. He was sort of this like drunken warlord kind of guy.
I heard his debut album.
Yeah. Anyway, so there was that thing that happened, and then also there was Il-Ghazi besieged a town, and the town didn't have any sort of defenders in there, and there was a priest. I think he was even a bishop, and he was like, you know what, guys, we're going to defend this town. And he put on armor, and he got a sword, and he led his troops to defend the town, which doesn't seem like that big of a deal, except this was something bishops weren't supposed to do. Bishops weren't supposed to throw down. Bishops weren't supposed. They were supposed to be men of peace. They were not supposed to be men of war. They definitely were not supposed to be leading men and killing other men. But he did it anyway and was very successful and saved the town. And people started saying like, "Hey, we've got all these problems of violence in our newly conquered region. Maybe, hear me out. Maybe we should allow holy men to take up arms again and kill people."
That seems crazy, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but this bishop kind of like, by saving this town, kind of set a precedent. And then if you wanted to divide the Christian world into hawks and doves, maybe we could right now. So the hawks were like, hey, we've got a new paradigm developing here. Shouldn't we have men of violence who are also holy men in order to defend the faith? And then the doves would be like, no, we should not, because we've been called to love your enemies, and these Christian virtues. We should trust in God. We should entrust in the arms of men. And then the hawks would say, yes, but did not God create these arms of men? And would He not? So you had this sort of internal disagreement over sanctioned violence in Christendom.
Can I say, so that does make me feel better that it wasn't just approved of immediately, that this is a great idea. There was no criticism of this idea. So that's good that there was controversy around the idea.
Oh, definitely.
I guess it's a bummer that eventually it still happens, but...
So it's also encouraging that it spawned from a guy wanting to protect his town from being slaughtered.
Right.
That's encouraging, although, granted, he probably shouldn't have. But
yeah. It was probably one of those little flashpoint moments that gave color to a debate that had been going on, because we are politically, the church is now in a realm where violence is going to be a more common occurrence, and how do we deal with that in our sort of religious paradigm that has a lot more calls to nonviolence than perhaps other religious paradigms. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, anyway, a real practical. So with all of these pilgrims that are being killed, a lot of knights, sort of noblemen who lived in the region, decided to create a bodyguard agency. And so they decided that they were going to be the bodyguards for these pilgrims. So when pilgrims went to these sites, they would go armed with the pilgrims to make sure that the pilgrims were not molested in any way, and so they sort of would wander around, and they were given donations, and I don't think they were paid, because they did this out of their own volition, but they started receiving donations, and these guys decided, hey, you know what? Like, this is a really great thing that we're doing, and they began to think we should have a religious order around protecting pilgrims. Now, there had been a religious order that had started in the Middle East, in the Levant, in Jerusalem, a number of years before, and they were a religious order that created created hospitals. So they created hospitals to care for the sick, to care for lepers, and to care for those who in the Crusades were wounded. And these men were known as the Hospitallers, or the Order of Saint, the Hospital of Saint John of Jerusalem, or the Order of, anyway. They were in Jerusalem. They were the Hospitallers, the Order of Saint John. So their job was basically like military field wounds, essentially.
Yeah.
Triage, yeah. And
this, for what it's worth, this is saying that it is St. John of Jerusalem, the most venerable order of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem.
Perfect. So that's the name of it.
Yeah.
And so they were established as an order. So what an order means is that the Pope gave you the thumbs up. You're allowed to do this. People took vows. Took holy vows, just like if you were Benedictine or Franciscan, you were a member of the Order of the Hospitallers, and you had you took vows, and so this is there was a charter that you had to follow. There was rules that you had to follow.
Yeah.
Actually, the St. John's Hospitallers still exist today.
That's cool.
I think they started in 1080, and they have an unbroken line of membership to this day. They are now known as St. John's Ambulance.
And are they all over the world?
They're all over the world. They are volunteer, basically volunteer ambulance, volunteer paramedics. They're still headquartered in Jerusalem, which is fascinating.
What's their training look like? Because if I had two ambulances showed up and one was from the hospital and one was from the hospitalers, and they're like, "Hi, we're volunteers," I'd be like,
yeah. I actually realized that the St. John's ambulance is not a very big thing in the U.S. There was St. John's ambulance when I was a kid growing up. I think it's something that, but like if you're in a small town, you don't have a big hospital, you don't have a professional class of paramedics. You had these people that were it's like volunteer firefighters in small towns. You had volunteer ambulance.
Wow.
But there was anyway. So the order still exists today. Don't know much about it, but it's kind of fun to think about. And so these Templars were like, okay, if we have this service order of hospital, we should have a service order of protection for pilgrims. And they were living in Jerusalem, and their headquarters was in the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. The Al-Aqsa Mosque still exists today. It's now a mosque again. And it is right across the square from the Dome of the Rock, so that big gold dome.
Right.
So the Templars got their name because they were the brothers of the temple. They lived in the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. This was their HQ. And so they elected a leader. And he was a Frenchman, and his name was Hugh of Payens, Payns. You can call him Hugh of Pains if you want, which is kind of cool.
I was just going to say Hugh of Pain sounds awesome.
Yeah, but Hugh of Payens, he came to the Middle East, as many knights did, as many noblemen did, for pilgrimage, and also because swords were needed. And there were skirmishes and battles all the time, and he and his knights stayed, and they elected him as the head of this new order. But they didn't have a charter.
Bodyguards.
Of bodyguards.
Yep.
They didn't have a charter. They didn't have a rule of life. And they wanted one. And so Hugh of Payens' job was to kind of find somebody in the Christian world who could write a order for them to be able to have some sort of rule that the men could follow. So King Baldwin the Second, I think, he was the king of Jerusalem. And it's kind of funny to me that the kings of Jerusalem were like known as King Baldwin. King Baldwin IV was the famous leper king. But anyway, King Baldwin II was like, all right, we got these knights, and they live in the Temple Mount, and they're being bodyguards, and they're wanting to be a holy order. And they were, unlike the Hospitallers, ended up becoming a military order as well. But more than the Hospitallers, the Templars had this new idea of Christian warrior knight. Up till then, knights were seen as very secular things.
Sure.
Warriors who were either hired or by vows to their lords took care of very worldly matters such as bloodshed and policing and that kind of thing. But there was one man who was thinking of recasting knighthood to also emulate Christian virtues, and his name was Bernard of Clairvaux. Uh-huh. And so Bernard of Clairvaux was a Cistercian? Well, I think so. Or
Cistercian.
Yeah, he was
primarily responsible for founding the Cistercian.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the Cistercian order was an order of poverty, an order of work, similar to the Benedictines, but I think a little more intense than the Benedictines.
Sure.
And he was well respected. The popes liked him. He had a golden tongue. Like, his rebuke was scathing of wealth in excess.
He would have been a Twitter star.
Twitter star, Bernard of Clairvaux, for sure. He was a true believer in poverty and service. He was. And Hugh of Payens went to him, and Baldwin wrote to him and said, hey, we've got these new guys. They want to create a holy order of Christian warrior who is going to fight the enemies of Christendom. And Bernard of Clairvaux was like, I can write that charter for you. I can write that rule of life for you. And he does. So he writes the rule of life, and it was centered around chastity. So you couldn't get married, couldn't have kids. It was centered around obedience. You were obedient to the internal life of the order, and poverty. That you were not to make you were not to have much money. This is ironic based on what happened to the Templars. Their symbol was, as we sort of we know the Templars as wearing the red cross, but their actual symbol was just a simple black and white flag, and their crest was to showcase the poverty was two dudes sharing a horse.
Really?
Yeah, that's their symbol. It's two dudes sharing a horse because they couldn't afford two horses.
What was on the black and white flag?
Like the left side was white, the right side was black.
Oh, so halved.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure. Or up and down. I can't remember.
Up and down, black. Is it?
It's up and down. Okay. Yeah. So that's the flag.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And then the red cross becomes part of their symbol a little bit later on. And then you've got the blue and white cross of the Hospitallers, the red and white cross of the Templars, and then later on a rival military order called the Teutonics get started, and they are Germans. And they're black and white.
Did they sing? It sounds like
the Teutonics.
Teutonics.
Yeah. They a cappella group.
The acapella.
Yeah.
That's right.
Doing great on YouTube.
Huge fan. Yeah.
Anyway,
By the way, I have been waiting for a good opportunity to make was Bernard of what's his name?
Clairvaux?
Was he clairvoyant?
Clairvoyant.
I've been waiting for the joke. It just hasn't.
he couldn't have been
I wanted credit
clairvoyant
for it.
because he wanted the Templars to be to have lives of poverty, but a Spanish king named Alfonso is going to wreck that. But we'll get there.
You're telling me a guy named Alfonso does not want to live in poverty.
Correct.
The strangest thing.
Copy that.
So, so then the internal life of the order was one of it was a military order. It was a religious order. You took vows. You were there for life. You didn't get married. You didn't have sex. You didn't have children. And anybody could join, nobleman or commoner. And so this was a very wildly successful thing. Commoners all joined. People that didn't have any other recourse in life could join. And you went and you fought and you lived in various places. We'll talk about how it grew in a second, but we're still at the rule. And so the rule was one that was supposed to tame and temper the more showy and broy aspects of knighthood into what?
The broy aspect?
The broy aspect. Like they were kind of bros. Knights were bros.
I understood what
Knights
the word
Templar
meant.
to show and bro.
No, not to be bros.
Okay.
So knighthood in the Middle Ages was
Oh my gosh.
flashy clothes. I'm so cool. I can, I
Vow to a lady.
Yes, yeah, I can throw down. I've got a fancy horse, and people, the hawks of the Christian world, were worried that their warrior class was a little too licentious. And so they were wanting to create a warrior class that was focused on the life of asceticism and poverty and obedience and throwing down. I just think back to 2 podcasts ago, we were talking about the Guardians and all this kind of
It
stuff.
sounds like that's what Plato, or Socrates through Plato, wanted. Anyway, so it's anyway, they both still want the same thing. There's anyway, I'm wondering if there is actually anything distinctly Christian about this, right?
I don't think it's a good thing.
Okay.
You think this is a good
No, I don't think it's a good thing. But it's interesting. What you just said is that basically, as soon as people were kind of okay with it, like 5 of these orders popped up immediately.
Yeah.
So there was something like...
not even way more than 5.
Sure, but
But that doesn't mean it's a good thing.
No. What I'm saying is something bubbled up, like that desire was there, and then once the theology got around it, you know what I mean? Like all these groups suddenly popped up, and I just don't understand why.
There
I understand
are
why,
appealing
but-
aspects
Yeah, sure.
to a structured life.
Right. Yes. But that structured life involves war. Is,
But the thing is, and I was going to bring this up at the end of the podcast, like also just talking about, we need to have, or the idea of like sanctioning violence is going to be at some level necessary for a state or for a group of people.
yes.
Coupling that sanctioned violence with a religious life is
Weird.
really troublesome for us in the church.
Yes.
But then it does raise a question: should it never happen, or can it happen well? But we'll get there later.
Okay.
Anyway, so Bernard of Clairvaux writes the order, and Hugh of Payon goes to the west to recruit people to come help on this a big campaign to take the town of Damascus, or to take to besiege Damascus. And when he does, it is insanely, wildly successful. He recruits tens of thousands. He recruits like 10,000 knights.
Wow.
They want to join. They go, and I believe they successfully take the town of Damascus, and it's the first big victory for the Crusaders, or for the Templars. We're going to talk. We'll get to. We won't even get to the Second Crusade and why it starts. But that's sort of the crusade that makes the Templars famous. But there's another part to this story that is really important to tell about the founding of the Templars. So we have the order; anybody can join it, and that is there was this dude named King Alfonso. King Alfonso is in Spain. King Alfonso lived a warrior's life. So Spain in the Middle Ages was basically divided into North and South, the North being Christendom, the South being Islam. I believe King Alfonso was the king of Leon and Castile, although he may have been the king of Aragon. I can't remember. Let's just say he was the king of Castile, which is right in the middle of Spain.
Great.
Anyway, so he had spent his life fighting the Muslims in the south and trying to sort of push the Muslims off of the Iberian Peninsula into North Africa. And he lobbied for years to the Pope saying, like, hey, man, this is a crusade too. Like, it can't just be the Middle East. We're also fighting enemies of Christendom or whatever. Okay. And then eventually you're like, you're right, this is that. And so then this whole big campaign called the Reconquista happened in Spain. And the Reconquista was the reconquering of the Iberian Peninsula, pushing the Muslims into Africa. And this was something that went on from 1100 all the way to like almost the Reformation.
Oh, wow.
Like, it went on forever.
Long time.
You go to Portugal, the south of Portugal, you go to the south of Spain, and you go to those cities in the south, and they have Muslim influence in their architecture all over. Yeah. Anyway, so King Alfonso is fighting the Muslims in the Iberian Peninsula, and he was a warrior king. He loved the Templars. He tried to start his own orders. He started 2 of them. They didn't really take. But he started his own, like, Knights Templar. It didn't really happen. But he, like, slept on his shield. And he decided that...
It's got to be a big shield, because if it's small, I mean, like, the comfort level
is just not
so low.
But as the king, he was dedicated so much to the warrior cause that he thought that the company of women would make him soft, which presented a problem for the kingdom.
For having an heir?
He didn't have any kids.
Yeah.
So no kids. And he was a bit of a, like, bombastic dude. And when he died... much to the chagrin of his advisors, he left the entire kingdom of Castile to the Templars.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. This is a problem.
That is a problem.
And all the bros and the Templars were like, yeah!
This is awesome.
Yeah. No, but let's be clear. I don't think the Templars were yet bros. They were true believers in life of poverty at this point.
Okay.
So they will be bros later.
So then is this a problem for them?
This is a problem for them because A, they just inherited a giant pool of wealth.
Well, they're supposed to be poor.
But B, they are also not... They're not rulers.
Sure. Yeah.
It's supposed to be the divine right of kings. It's supposed to be that, these the kingdoms were to be chosen by God through the lineage of the kids. And so this was a huge problem, and also just a logistical problem because...
How to manage this.
How do you manage this huge kingdom?
With 40 dudes or whatever it was.
And so all the advisors in Castile, when their king Alfonso was dead, were like... Uh-oh. We don't want these foreign guys running our country or running our kingdom. So the Pope and the order had to make a kind of a decision. And so they made a decision to tie a bow on the story of King Alfonso. So what happened was they got King Alfonso's brother, and they're like, all right, King Alfonso's brother, you're going to be king. King Alfonso's brother did not want to be king. He was a monk who had taken a vow of poverty and chastity.
Sounds like the perfect choice.
Yeah, exactly.
They made him recant his vows of poverty and chastity. They forced him to marry this girl. And as soon as they had a kid, Alfonso's brother abdicated, made that kid king, and went back to the monastery.
Yeah.
Sure. The kid was a daughter.
What a dude!
Yeah. The kid was a daughter, so the daughter became queen of Castile, and she ended up marrying somebody, and then it merged the kingdom. So that's how that story ended.
Okay.
The Templars did not end up ruling the kingdom.
Oh.
Although they kind of kept the paper that said they did, which is going to be a problem later.
Yeah.
But what they did was they negotiated all the sweetest castles.
Oh, great.
So
Which
they
is probably
said,
what they wanted
yes,
instead.
they said,
Yeah.
we'll take all the sweetest castles. We'll set up our an order, or we'll set up a wing of our troops, of our knights there, and we will fight the Muslims in the south of Spain.
Help take care of that peninsula.
Yeah,
right?
we'll take care of that
Which isn't
peninsula.
a horrible deal.
Which isn't a horrible deal. And then everyone was like, oh man, we can't really force them to give up the crown, so we'll like, we'll kind of ask them to give up the crown. And then the Knights Templar had one more ask for this to happen, and the Pope granted it. And it was that they never had to pay tithes in the entirety of their whole order. They didn't have to give any money to the Catholic Church, and they had the same rights to collect tithes from the people in where they existed, from the local populace themselves.
Oh no.
That's crazy. Yeah.
And it was accepted, and they said, yes, this is a great idea. No. And then, so that was the one thing that they wanted. They didn't have to pay tithes to the church, and they wanted to keep the tithes for themselves. This is this is going to be the death blow for the Templars in 200 years.
I get not paying taxes, but then wanting to pull taxes from everybody around you seems like a step.
But the reason why they said to, everyone sort of agreed was like, hey, these are the guys that we are sanctioning to fight in the Levant. We're going to be sending them money. We're going to be sending them money anyway.
Right.
Through the church. We might as well just cut out the
Give it to
middleman
them
and let them
directly.
do it themselves.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. And then the second thing that they wanted to do was they wanted to have the men who had taken vows in the order, so all of the brothers of the order, they wanted to be able to offer confession and absolution within the order as opposed to in the church.
Instead of hiring a priest, they can just do it.
Instead of going to a priest to confess their sins, they wanted to be able to confess their sins to their superiors in the order.
It's like buying a nice espresso maker, so you don't have to go to Starbucks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so, and then the Pope agreed to that, and they
Right.
did. And this is going to be a problem
Also a
later on too.
yeah.
Oh yeah,
They're basically becoming their own church.
they
Yeah,
essentially
yeah.
were carving out a mini version of the Catholic Church within the Catholic Church that was bent on warfare. Yeah.
This isn't going to breed any
And poorly
resentment
at
on the
all.
other
Yeah.
side, I don't
yes.
think.
So this
It'll
is
go well. This will go really well.
But at the time, everyone thought this was a great idea.
Right.
Later on, no one thought it was a great idea. But not the Templars did.
Right.
But at the time, everyone thought it was like, yeah, this makes sense. Let's do this. And so So they didn't have to be ordained. So you could basically confess to somebody who wasn't ordained in the church. They had taken vows to be a Templar as long as they were your superior. And so. They were founded in 1119. Okay. This is when the bunch of the bros were like, hey, we should protect the pilgrims. By 1140, they were the most famous order in all of Christendom.
Wow.
And people who were dying and giving them lands and castles and estates by like the bowlful. They had huge tracts of land in France, this enormous tract of land in Spain, huge tracts of land and castles in England, in Germany, not so much in Italy. They had the whole island of Cyprus. They had huge parts of Sicily, and then they controlled the castles in those major cities in the Middle East. Acre being the sort of the big one, Beirut, Tripoli, Sidon. Somehow they lose Acre eventually. I can't remember because Richard I takes it back over.
How's that vow of poverty working out?
Yeah, and the vow of poverty is not...
Forgotten.
Well,
Right.
I mean, they sort of say, like, well, we're not buying fancy things. We're still wearing our... Like, they eschewed having fancy armor, and they just wore, like, basic armor and a white smock. And eventually someone drew a big red cross on it, and that's where they got that. But they just sort of wore this white smock and not very flashy armor, and they're like, see, we're poor. But they had enormous tracts of land, and they ended up becoming a decentralized ledger of finance in the Middle East, which is going to be really interesting. We'll talk about that next podcast. They're like the first Bitcoin.
I wasn't sure if you were going to say they're a bank, but no, they don't have their own currency, do they?
No, but what they could do was any letter that was signed off by a Templar in one city was going to be honored by a Templar in another city.
Wow.
So you could give a Templar a pound of gold in Tripoli, and then sail all the way to Toulouse with a
get
letter,
that.
and
Yeah.
then you could go and you can get that pound of gold back.
That's crazy.
Yep.
Okay.
So they basically became, and then they would give, they take a little bit off the top for their services.
Of course they would.
I think, or maybe
Poverty.
they didn't even. Anyway, but so
The first Robin Hood if they didn't.
yeah. We'll talk more about
They just
So
invested the gold while they had it,
That's
while
what
you
I'm
were
saying.
sailing,
Yeah,
and
the
then
float.
Yes.
would return
exactly.
the gold
Yeah.
and keep the proceeds
Yeah.
from the.
So yeah, already you can see seeds of trouble in the future. You've got all of this money. You've got something within the Christian world that is wholly dedicated to violence and warfare, and you had them completely cordoned and sectioned off from any kind of outside regulatory bodies in the church. So the Templars only lasted for like 250 years.
That's short.
Yeah.
I always thought they were a much longer
Yeah.
thing.
And meanwhile, the Hospitallers are still going. No, they're not a military order anymore, as far as I know.
Do the Hospitallers bank? Can I go do the banking?
I
Gold
don't,
bank, yeah.
They never really banked. The Templars did the banking. But anyway, so yeah, I just this happens a lot, and some of the sort of the things that I find interesting about the early story of the Templars is there's something about an organization saying we are going to eschew we're going to eschew riches and take a vow of poverty, and we have this mission. Now, in this case, the mission is the conquering of the Holy Land, which I don't think Christians have any business
Well, before that,
doing.
it was just protecting the pilgrims, right?
Yeah, which I think was a good mission.
Sure.
But then it evolved into the best way to protect the pilgrims is to kill all of the pilgrims' enemies, right? That's not. But there is something about like orders that take vows of poverty that, for whatever reason, attract donations. Why is that? Why do people say like, oh man, those guys are doing good work, I want to give my money to them?
It still costs money to. So, the Gethsemane Abbey in Trappist, Kentucky, still has costs. They have to. They have people that work the land. So not only the monks, but also people that they hire. There are things that they need that they can't grow there themselves. Like there's a monetary need. I don't know how the state.
We need to tap into that.
Is that what you want? Yeah. If you think we're doing good work, send that money.
Yeah, we're not reconquering the Holy Land. That's
It's
not
called GoFundMe, man. It's got a
Seriously,
GoFundMe page
yeah.
anytime you want. That's
the truth.
You need
my
house
God.
funds?
Yeah,
Just
seriously.
GoFundMe, man.
GoFundMe.
Rock
Anyway,
and roll.
but anyway, I've always sort of found it ironic that throughout in the history of the Western Church, you have these movements of organized orders around poverty and good works. And those orders are almost always swamped
By money.
by money and then undone by money.
Sure.
And that just to me is like incredibly sad. I mean, you see it in Protestant churches now too, right? Like you of course you see it. You
That
see-
attract too much money.
yeah,
and
these
that's the
mega
downfall.
churches that are we're doing God's work of preaching the gospel and then are just like, swamped with cash and don't know what to do with it and build like $1
probably
million
closer.
facility for Sunday school.
Yacht church.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yacht
that-
church. Anyway, it's just I've always just found that kind of the troubling aspect of these stories. It always kind of goes that way.
Yeah.
And also, there's just also something about something attractive about that ordered life. Like there are secular versions of that ordered life now, of just sort of having a life that's built on principles, having a rule that one follows.
Right.
And you can go find whole Reddit threads of people. I even found one that was called Monk Life. Now it had nothing to do with
Being a monk.
religious order, but
Right.
he was like, it was like meditation, kettlebells, and keto # monk life, right? Like, but there's just something about having that sort of structure that lots of people find appealing.
Sure.
And there's also something about it appealing for men as well. I'm not saying that doesn't happen with women, but there is something about this ordered life done together that you see throughout history being very appealing to groups of dudes.
Sure.
And I don't have an account for that. I don't know why it is. No.
I can't speak to a reason for it. I agree with you. That's the story of the monasteries also. That's fundamentally friendship that built those monasteries.
It does make me happy that in the history of the church, the order that was centered around warfare and violence doesn't survive beyond its doesn't survive 200 years, whereas you have monasteries that are still going. That are focused on poverty and prayer.
Franciscans are still rocking
exactly.
in.
So I think that's something to be said as well.
Yeah.
But wrestling with the Crusades, I don't think any modern believer can look at that with any amount of like saying that was a great idea.
Right.
So what happened on Friday the 13th? Tell me how they ended.
Oh man, that's next podcast.
Okay.
We're doing 2 on these guys?
Yeah, we're doing 2
No,
on
we're
these. Oh gosh, we haven't even talked about Richard I. We haven't even got to Saracens.
Right.
Oh my goodness. Okay. That changes everything about all my questions.
No.
Can I?
By all means.
Sorry. You referenced this on your last episode, which I forget however many that is ago. I just wonder, is this actually a gendered thing to say that it's only men who like that ordered life? Weren't you saying there's some rapid rise in?
Yeah, no, you're right. There is. You're true. It's right. There is a rapid, apparently millennial nuns is a huge growing section right now.
Yeah, so I just wondered, is this more?
I follow like 12 millennial nuns on Twitter.
Do you really?
Oh,
That's
are
like the holiest.
Yeah. And then you go on Twitter and it's just garbage, and then
then
there's this nun and she like takes a selfie of her and she's like, I've been here praying for 2 hours and praying for the life of Christians. And you're just like, oh my word, this is really
Isn't it weird to take a selfie and anyway?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Is it?
Nuns?
I don't know enough about nuns.
It's a little weird to me.
Is it?
On the whole, don't pray in the marketplace, right?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? You can't take a selfie. You can't
doing
take
your good works before men, right?
Well, whatever. All right. Well, sorry, Twitter nun.
I was gonna say.
Maybe I'm making it. I don't know.
Don't at us. I don't. Whatever. Is that what the young kids say these days? Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, I think Thomas, you're exactly right. So, I'm
wondering, is this more, feeling unmoored by a disconnection from traditions or history or our past, or is this actually a male problem specifically?
Yeah.
So,
I don't know if it's man. I feel like anything I say can skew sexist really easy.
Okay.
Not that I'm a sexist, but I'm already
like
in hot water.
that's what
I'm going to stop now.
That's what a sexist would say. Yeah,
well,
seriously.
Yeah,
You're digging a hole right there. Yeah.
Already digging a hole.
But
I want to hear what you
I
have
think
to say.
the way to view the Templars is they took the forms and patterns and structures of the religious life and turned its focus to the secular here and now, to the political problems of the day, and tried to shoehorn the religious life into the political secular problems of the day, and people were really jazzed about it.
Right.
And thought, we're like, oh, this is a brand new thing. This is the new expression of Christianity that's
Right.
going to sort of move the ball forward. Not only are we going to have our souls taken care of, but we're going to have the world taken care of too.
Right.
And it burns out in 200 years. And it collapses under the weight of its own excess and violence. This is essentially what ends up happening.
Doesn't it? Feels kind of funny to say that 200 years is a short period of time.
Yeah, but for an idea, I think it is.
Maybe. I guess in the context of a church that's 2,000 years old.
Yeah.
That.
But then I don't know. See, I get sensitive to people saying like, oh, we can take the form of the religious and put it into the secular, and we're going to get really motivated people. And it's true, but I think I can't think of a good analogy. There's an idea percolating, but I don't have enough to bring it out.
But it did work for the Templars, right? Like it
For a bit.
I guess if you consider anyway. It worked in recruiting people, but there's something deeper that was its eventual undoing. I don't know.
It worked for 4 generations.
Yeah.
Right?
But-
Essentially, 5 generations.
But still, that approach to an ordered life is the monastic life, and that's outlived that Templar order.
For sure.
So that's, I don't know. Maybe there's something appealing in that, probably to a certain type of person. But like AJ, you would be bored out of your mind if you did the same thing every day, right?
Yeah, to an extent. I don't know. I crave novelty.
Right.
And,
that's what. Yeah.
But novelty can be found. It doesn't necessarily mean variance from routine.
Yeah.
Actually, that's exactly what it means. What I mean is that you can find novelty even within routine. Like
Sure.
every morning, I could read a different book. Does that make sense?
Sure.
I can find that novelty even within the routine of a monastic order.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about this first one of the Templars. Just their establishment, who they are, the world that they're entering into, and also that this is a wing of Christendom that is, I think, one that we shouldn't lionize and one that we shouldn't sort of hold up as something to revel in. I think there's also a dark section of the internet nowadays that is anti-Islam that longs for some sort of return to a militarized Christianity that will have some sort of war, and that is, I think, that is outside the bounds of orthodoxy. As far
Doesn't
as I'm
sound like a
concerned.
good idea.
No. And it wasn't a good idea when it happened.
Right.
Even though it took root and captured hearts and minds for, like I said, 5 generations. Yeah. At some point, it was still kicked out. Whereas the Hospitallers had their founding principle on helping as opposed to conquering. Anyway, even though they did fight. So that's the Templars. That's we'll
Templars Part 1, right?
Templars Part 1.
I want to hear more about these guys.
Yeah. We'll get to their sort of their glories and then their agonies in the next podcast for sure.
Rock and roll.
Great. Sounds good to me. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you specifically, Graham. And this has been Classical Stuff You Should Know. You can check out our website, classicalstuff.net, and we have all of our back episodes there. If you're craving episodes 1 through, I think, probably 9-ish now.
Sure.
All of our old episodes are up on the website. You can find them there, along with pictures of our ugly mugs.
Yep.
And I do mean ugly mugs. We're selling drinkware.
Yes.
I'm just kidding. It's our faces. And you can tweet at us at CLSSCAL stuff at the Twitter. And you can email us classicalstuff@veritasacademy.net. Those are the places you can find us. We would love to hear from you. And if you want to send us memes or more additions to Classical Stuff Bingo, we would love that, and we'd love to hear from you. We always try to answer all the emails we get. Sometimes it takes us a month or two, but we'll try to get there if we can.
Cool.
So thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
See you later.